Danger Zone.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, ladies and gents. Welcome back for another week with me, your host, Kev Baker. That's right, it's time for the Kev Baker Show right here on your number one network, Truth Frequency Radio, www.tfrlive.com. Another week down and another week all planned and ready to go. And it's going to be another brilliant week of radio right here on KBS. For example, tonight, joined by my good friend, my colleague, we should really call you, since we work so closely together these days. Anthony Patch is here tonight, so we'll be joined by Anthony in just a moment. Now, remember to check out Anthony's website over at anthonypatch.com. And don't forget, you can check out my website over at kevbakershow.com as well. The new Entangled magazine is out, available through Anthony's website. There's also a link to that over there on kevbakershow.com. And I've also included a donate button on my website. And I want to thank the few people who have taken advantage of that so far. You know, it's through all of you out there that I'm still here in the first place because of all the generosity that you showed me after my heart attack back in March. And I can't believe it's been over 6 months already since that happened. But I'm still not working, so I'm not going cap in hand, folks. But if you do think that what we do here is worth just a couple of dollars, then please, please, please feel free to visit the website and click on that. Or alternatively, you can subscribe to my show through my archive page, or you can subscribe to Anthony's show through his archive page, because right here at TFR, we are unique because the network does not keep all of the money. They make sure us hosts get 50% of that as well. And that enables us to keep going with all the best of equipment and to keep ourselves going off air as well. So with that shameless plug out the way, let me go to my main man, author, researcher, public speaker and fellow host on this brilliant network, Mr. Anthony Patch. Like I was saying, you can find all of his books, all of his work over at anthonypatch.com. And Tony, here we are again. Another week is gone. We always have a kind of laugh and a joke when we hook up on the Monday about the fact that the weekends seem to fly by quicker and quicker all the time, right?
It seems like I just talked to you saying, how was your weekend? It's pretty strange, but you know what? You speak the truth on Truth Frequency Radio, my friend, and that is no lie. Pardon the pun, because we're going to talk about LiFi tonight. LiFi. So, Kev, if you want to reference the article that we've been looking at, researchers just unveiled a new LiFi system that's 100 times faster than Wi-Fi. And we spent a lot of time talking about 5G. Tonight, we're going to talk about visible light communications systems, VLC, and a whole lot of other things. But that's going to kick us off with the Internet of Light.
And this was an article that you sent me from the metro.co.uk. And the headline here reads, Super Fast LiFi. And that's L-I-F-I. Not Wi-Fi, but LiFi. 100 times faster than Wi-Fi, could be here sooner than we thought. And just to read through the first part of this, it says our phones and laptops could be about to get a lot faster as a new breakthrough has brought super fast Li-Fi closer to reality. Now, Li-Fi stands for light fidelity, and it uses visible light from LED bulbs to transfer data rather than Wi-Fi radio waves, and could be 100 times faster than the traditional Wi-Fi that most of us are using just now. Chinese scientists now believe that devices could be available in just 6 years after a breakthrough using a carbon nanomaterial, full-color emissive carbon dots, to provide the light to transmit data. And it goes on to say that Q Songnan, an associate researcher at Changchun Institute of Optics, said quote, many researchers around the world are still working on this. We were the first to successfully create it using cost-effective raw materials such as urea with simple processing. Chinese tests in 2015 showed that LiFi can reach speeds of 50 gigabits per second. The technology began to make waves after scientist Harold Haas of the University of Edinburgh, no less, right here in Scotland, discussed it at a 2011 TED Talk. It has been viewed 2.2 million times. Technologies based on LiFi are currently being developed by several companies in Russia, Mexico, and around the world. And to wrap it up, it says Dr. Haas has shown some cheap solar cells can be used as, quote, receiver for LiFi, and hopes that they could be used as a combined power source stroke data network in developing countries. And Dr. Haas says it should be so cheap that it's everywhere. The visible light spectrum comes for free. And Tony, this is mad how we've got into this, because it wasn't that long ago that we were talking about these new fantouche LED light bulbs that we're all being forced onto over here in the EU. And to pardon the pun, this definitely puts a different light on that.
It does, my friend. And we're going to toss a couple of numbers around here just to give some perspective and context to what we're talking about in terms of speed comparisons to Wi-Fi. But yeah, last Monday, we talked about the fact that the standard LED bulb in your home has been instituted by governments because they wanted to outlaw supposedly the energy wasting incandescent bulb. It has a tungsten filament in it. Well, it's all been a sham. The whole reason for the LED is because LEDs for years, since 2005, have been available as a Wi-Fi receiver and transmitter, therefore a relay system for 4G and 5G millimeter wave broadcasting. Now, and you can go to your favorite, hardware supply chain, big box store, whatever, you can buy, and this has been out there for almost 2 years, you can buy LiFi equipped LED light bulbs. So this isn't brand new technology, folks. It's just interesting that LiFi hasn't really hit the radar for most people. Everybody, including myself, have been so focused on 5G Wi-Fi. But just to put it in perspective, a LiFi system will transmit, or relay is the way I prefer to look at these bulbs. And there are other systems other than just bulbs. You mentioned the carbon dots, and we'll get into the carbon aspect of this in a little bit. But 40 gigabytes per ray of light in a LiFi system is the data capacity. And now you compare 40 gigabytes to the average Wi-Fi system of 300 megabytes. Now, if you go to 5G, you can get up as much as 1 gigabyte in a 5G system. 4G, 3G, you're going to get 300 to 350 megabytes. We're talking 40 gigabytes in a LiFi system. We're going to talk about, the pros and cons of this in terms of the technology side of this, but picture this, folks. They're making a big deal about rolling out Wi-Fi everywhere. But LiFi, the light transmission, is exactly how our DNA operates with photons and how information passes through our quantum computer brains, all through photons at the speed of light. And this LiFi system is trying to mimic that. And we're going to get into the carbon-based mimicry of that in just a minute. Go ahead, sir.
Now, just over here in Britain alone, Tony, I noticed one of our hardware stores, and I'm not going to name them, I don't want to be taken to court or anything like that, but they've been selling technology for this for a short while now. And one of the things that people have been reporting with this new kind of LED lighting that I've picked up on anyway, is the fact that some people seem to say that It can cause sore heads. It can give you almost tired, sore eyes, stuff like this. So I'm wondering, is there any real health dangers that come from this LiFi technology? Because we all know that sitting near our routers with a Wi-Fi there can be pretty harmful over time. It's a cumulative effect. But what about this LiFi? I mean, can the light from that harm you at all, Tony?
Well, first of all, the light is not visible. What they're transmitting are rapid pulses of light that are pulsing so quickly that the human eye cannot detect these pulses. Now, is it going to be harmful to us? From what I've read so far, and again, I try to go to the scientific papers. I don't go to the typical trade magazines in the scientific commercial world. And as far as I can tell, there's really no danger to the LiFi in terms of affecting our minds like 5G does. 5G is a millimeter wave spectrum that is so close to a microwave oven. Therein lies, I think, the risk and the danger in terms of heating up your mind, literally heating up your brain in a microwave level spectrum of transmitting energy. But the light energy I see is relatively inert. Let's call it more natural, if you will. So I'm not that concerned about the LiFi. And it's easily interrupted. It has a short range. And therefore, we're going to get into talking about the different router systems and different router materials and locations, because it really is fairly fragile, but it has an incredible throughput, as I just said.
Now, I was looking into this today as well, and I was looking at some of the pros and cons about it, and I like some of the advantages that this offers. And just to read this here, it says efficiency. LiFi works on visible light technology. Since homes and offices already have LED bulbs for lighting purposes, the same source of light can be used to transmit data. Hence, it's very efficient in terms of cost as well as energy. Light must be on to transmit data, so when there is no need for light, it can be reduced to a point where it appears off to the human eye, just like you were explaining there, but it's actually still on and working. Its availability, well, wherever you have a light source, i.e. a light bulb, you can get the internet. And the security aspect of this, and one main advantage I came across today, is the fact that since light can't pass through structures, i.e. walls, things like that, okay, that kind of limits you in the house. Maybe my son through in the bedroom won't be able to tap into the LiFi in this room, but he's got a light bulb socket in there. We could use that in there. And there won't be anyone coming along and harvesting any of your encrypted data or hacking into you, maybe sat outside with a laptop, because again, this light cannot travel through walls. So I like that. But then there's disadvantages. It says the internet cannot be used without a light source. This could limit the locations and the situations in which LiFi could be used. Because it uses visible light, the light cannot penetrate walls. The signal's range is limited by physical barriers. Other sources of light might actually interfere with this signal. And one of the biggest potential drawbacks is the interception of signals outdoors. Sunlight will interfere with the signals if it's coming in the window, shining directly in, resulting in an interrupted internet, possibly. And the last disadvantage, it says, is a whole new infrastructure for LiFi would be needed to be constructed. Well, is that really the case, Anthony, if we're just using our light bulb socket and plugging one of these things in there? Do we really have to build a whole new infrastructure?
I don't believe so, because if we're looking at a LED bulb as a router, there's no reason that they cannot hand that off in a LiFi system, in a piggybacking. So begin with transmitting the Wi-Fi, which again, it has its limitations because walls will block a Wi-Fi signal, and therefore you have to have a close-by transmitter with a high enough power outside or on the other side of the wall of a building in order to penetrate the wall with a good solid signal to your light bulb Wi-Fi routers. But once they arrive at that bulb, There's no reason that that can't be piggybacked to a LiFi transmission system. So the question is, why would you bother having both systems? Why would you have the mixture? Well, so that you don't have to build the infrastructure of transmitting by light alone, you can piggyback it. Now, there are developments going on in cities where between buildings, let's picture skyscrapers, there are LiFi transmitting and receiving setups between tall buildings, which have enough power to overcome the ambient light, as you said, from the sunlight and other weather conditions. But that's a very limited application. So what I think we're looking at, again, is the piggybacking of the two technologies. Now, if we look at one of the more recent developments, because I think the article that I'm quoting from Futurism is a little bit more current than the one you're quoting from. And they're indicating here, in terms of overcoming some of the limitations that you indicated there, Kev, is that they can use a directionable or directable infrared system, or infrared system. And I'm just going to quote here. These antennas can very precisely direct rays of light from an optical fiber, and each antenna contains a pair of gratings capable of radiating light of different wavelengths and at different angles. As such, the system can eliminate interference. These antennas could be set up on a ceiling, and moving outside the range of one light antenna simply puts you in the range of another. So it's overlapping. They're overlapping within a building. They're providing different directional angles of the light, of the infrared light, and they're placing numerous transmitters and receivers about the room so that you maintain the integrity. Again, we're looking at short range, and some of these things, pardon me. Go ahead, sir.
See, I like the idea of this because, for example, right now I'm sitting less than a meter away from a router that's pumping out a 5G signal, or it would be if I hadn't closed the 5G channel down, because there's still a 2G option, a lot slower, right enough, for kind of remote devices to hook up to the net. But I'm not too keen, Tony, on sitting with something that's pumping out 5G less than a meter from my head every day.
Yeah, I think I'd rather have the light, the optical wireless system, or OWC as it's more correctly known. LiFi is just it's a trade name. It's an IEEE standard, but we talk about optical wireless communications. Picture your optical reader writer on your DVD and CD player in your laptop or tower. That's basically the same type of system. We're talking about an optical system. So I'm not concerned about the LiFi system. I would rather have that bathing the room with signals than the 5G.
No, I'm totally with you. I mean, I like this kind of technology. I really do.
Yeah, and I think, again, I just want to reiterate to people that, this has been around for at least 5 years. We have a short-range OWC system called the Wireless Body Area Network. That's WBAN. That's been around for at least 5 years, and that's part of the IEEE 802.15.7 standard. That's where this LiFi is regulated, where it's defined by their task group. So this isn't, earth-shattering news, but we thought we'd bring it to you because we talked about the LED bulbs on Monday of last week. We wanted to keep you apprised of where, these Wi-Fi, LiFi systems are at in their development. Now, one of the things that you picked out in that article that I found so relevant to the research that I've been doing has to do with carbon nanotubes. They actually were talking about microtubules in that article, were they not, Kev?
Pretty much. They were saying after a breakthrough using carbon nanomaterial, full color emissive carbon dots to provide the light to transmit data. And it's this carbon nanomaterial that caught my interest today as well, Tony. So tell us more about this.
Well, we're going back to talking about tubulin dimers. We're talking about neurons, Buckminster fullerenes, buckyballs, as they're often known, that's C60 carbon. What they're doing here with the LiFi, and this is really what I wanted to get into today, is they are reproducing what is occurring in our brains, in our quantum computer brains. They are reproducing using LiFi, using carbon dot transmitters, routers placed on the ceilings of rooms. And that is exactly the construct of the human neuron, which is composed of C60 carbon, Buckminster fullerene buckyballs, and contain the tubulin dimers, the paired 0 and 1 dimers within the human neuron. Now, we've gone on at length, Kev, talking about that. I'm not going to repeat all that again today, and it's in my Entangled magazine. You've got lots of articles on all of that material. But once again, we see I call it counterfeiting, if you want to call it copying or mimicking the human brains. This is where 5G and LiFi come into play. In the greater scheme at 30,000 feet of talking about the sentient world simulation, about a system that we are immersed in of electromagnetic signals that when they are counterfeiting, when they are mimicking what is happening structurally with C60 carbon, when they are electromagnetic energy spectrums copying those energy waves within the alpha waves, beta waves within our human mind, what this all boils down to, Kev, is again their ability to literally tap into our brains, affect the functioning of our brains. The voice-to-skull technology of old is the 5G, is the LiFi system of today. And that is what we are immersed in this present-day sentient world simulation. We are just highlighting for you folks the transmission systems that are employed to control us and will, in the very near future, absolutely render everyone to the level of a house pet, as we have talked about with Elon Musk relating it to AI. These are all woven together. These all work together. These are all integrated systems. Go ahead, sir.
And again, like you say, this is another example, yet again, of where they try to artificially mimic what goes on in nature. And, you know, Tony, microtubules and tubulin dimers, I thought that was the kind of thing that was kind of confined to our show here. Never ever thought I would hear it anywhere else outside alternative media or any of these geeky sites that I go to or you send me to. But you know that I love to immerse myself in the popular culture of TV shows. And there's one called Scorpion. Now, Scorpion, it's based on a true story. It was a young guy from Ireland called Walter O'Brien who showed immense promise as a hacker as a young kid. And he was basically snapped up by the American kind of alphabet agencies to work for them. Well, one of their latest episodes, and I was only watching this in the past couple of days, they were tasked to look into the paranormal. And they got to talking about the brain and what happens when we die. And one of the boffins, it's all based on like a team of geniuses, Tony. And one of these genius guys was really making a case for the paranormal. And he started talking about how consciousness, how that whole kind of thing of consciousness takes place in our microtubules. And then what happens to that quantum information when we die? Well, he was making a case for the microtubules emitting that quantum data back out into the real world, out into the universe. And that in itself, he was trying to make a case for possibly leading to these paranormal events that they were looking into. Mm-hmm. But imagine my surprise when on one of these programs they're talking about microtubules and quantum information and consciousness. I had to pinch myself to make sure this wasn't some Anthony Pat show I was listening to.
Well, you know, we've done a service for our audience, which is an audience comprised of critical thinkers, very intelligent people that follow our shows. And they have been brought up to speed with all of this terminology. We've given them the new alphabet. We've given them the new vocabulary. So when they encounter shows like that, they're able to say the same thing that you said, Kev, and that is, oh, I've heard that on the Kev Baker Show with Anthony Patch.
You see,
I'll be right back.
I have to thank you, Tony, for giving me a new level of understanding to the crap shows I watch. But no crap show here tonight, folks. We'll be back after the break with more from myself and the brilliant Anthony Patch. Don't go anywhere.
This is the Kev Baker Show.
Welcome back, everyone. You're tuned in to tonight's Kev Baker Show with me, your host, Kev Baker, and I've got Anthony Patch with me as well. Don't forget, Entangled magazine, the November edition has just hit the shelves. So don't waste any time. Head on over to anthonypatch.com. Check out the latest edition, which is all focused around AI. You won't regret it, I can tell you that. And Tony, before we get back into it tonight, what an absolutely brilliant show we had with the Robster on Friday. And of course, Robbie and his brilliant, beautiful other half, Cheryl, they do so much work behind the scenes, putting together what is an amazing magazine.
They really do. They do, as I call, the yeoman's work. They do the heavy lifting, and the graphics are all theirs. They come up with all the beautiful artistry. They do the layout. They make the magazine happen. All I do is throw my thoughts on the page, and they make it look beautiful and organized. So definitely. And, you know, Robbie came up with a brilliant idea I want to announce. He said, why don't we take some of the scientific articles that you put together over the last, almost 6 months now, and let's do a giveaway. Let's do a free magazine. Let's do a sample magazine for December as a Christmas gift to not only the subscribers, but to every visitor to the anthonypatch.com. And that will come out later this week. Again, courtesy of Robbie and Cheryl. They're going to take some of the articles that I've published, put them together. There are also 2 articles by Kathleen Urquhart in there. And we are going to make that available to anyone so that you have an idea before you subscribe what it is that you're going to find when you do subscribe. And I'm a little full of myself sometimes, and my hubris tends to show. But I will tell you, the things that we're presenting in that magazine, not just myself, but other contributors like Kev Baker, is information that I would say it would take you a lot of time and a lot of digging and knowing where to dig to find this information. But on top of the scientific information, I give you my perspective, my interpretation, my viewpoint on it. And if you've listened to me for any length of time, you know that I have a very contrarian point of view to mainstream science. So, Kev, with that, let's move on and talk about a light switch for neurons.
Well, this provided me much smiles today, Tony, because these articles that you were sending me, again, they act as confirmation of the information that mostly you, along with myself, have been putting out there on the show and in the magazine and videos as well. And it's all to do with the geometry of the brain. And I was just smiling today because this is something that you were telling us all about a long, long time ago. And then to see mainstream scientists almost having eureka moments talking about geometric structures within our brains when we're thinking. I'm thinking to myself, these guys could save themselves a lot of time. And don't worry about your hubris here, Tony. I'll give you the big head. They could have listened to you and they could have got told this a long time ago, right?
Well, I get a lot of information from the Lord. I'm a Christian, and I don't take credit for the things that I pass on. Yeah, it sounds like I'm, talking about myself and, we're saying, hey, we talked about this 3 years ago. It does sound like we're sort of self-aggrandizing one another. But for me, at least, I get led to a lot of these things by the Lord. It doesn't take much. He takes me to the things and I go, oh, okay, I see what it is you want me to see. So it's not that I'm a prophet. It's just that I try to focus on prayer. I try to focus on communicating with him Prayer with Jesus Christ is quantum entanglement with Jesus Christ. I've said that many times. We're going to present that little slice, folks, in mid-December. Myself and Kathleen Urquhart are going to put on another live stream conference, just the two of us. We're going to talk about the fullness of the Gentiles. And this is a completely different take than what you may be familiar with from your Sunday school Bible studies, because the fullness of the Gentiles is not what you think it is. And we're going to give you that information in our live stream. But it has to do with quantum entanglement as prayer with Jesus Christ. So there's a lot to that statement. What I'm saying, folks, is, yeah, we keep saying, we told you, we told you, we told you. There's an interesting trend that we've noted for you several times, and that is there are a lot of articles coming out now. There are a lot of TED Talks coming out that are presenting information that Kev and I have presented years ago. They're presenting it as Kev said, as new discoveries. So you have to ask yourself, from that 30,000-foot perspective, why are they rehashing? Why are they bringing these old pieces of information that were published as peer-reviewed papers years ago? Why are they bringing it out now as new discoveries? Well, in short, in brief, it keeps the money flowing. It keeps the grants coming. It's job justification. These are jobs programs. So they're just rehashing. They're trying to make it look like, they're doing something new, when in fact, this is information that's been out there. Now, specifically, we're going to get into the geometry of the brain, the geometry of neurons. And here's one of the things that has to do with mind control. And I'm going to read this. This is from a TED Talk that Ed Bowden, a researcher, presented, and it's very short. Ed Bowden shows how, by inserting genes for light-sensitive proteins into brain cells, he can selectively activate or deactivate specific neurons with fiber optic implants. With this unprecedented level of control, he's managed to cure mice of analogs of PTSD and certain forms of blindness. On the horizon, neural prosthetics. Folks, we've talked about proteins, protein folding of the construct of the human DNA. Our DNA is comprised of proteins. Proteins are the machinery. They're the heavy lifters. They're the ones that do the on and off. They're the ones that really make the chemical reactions and the information flow through the DNA and help with the replication of it. So using synchrotron particle accelerators, producing hard X-rays, they infer the shape, the construct, the shape, as I say, the pasta curls of protein folds in order to, in silico, in the computer, model these proteins. Now, what they're able to do is to take specific light-sensitive proteins and insert them into brain cells, and then they can specifically activate and deactivate those with fiber optic implants. They can also do that, I want to add here, with 5G millimeter wave transmissions. They can turn off and on specific neurons by affecting the proteins. Go ahead, Kev.
Tony, is this what we would refer to as optogenetics?
Yes.
There we go. See, this is crazy. This is entanglement at work, because I was sharing with Tony today the fact I've been looking quite deeply into DNA and genetics and stuff like that. And I was saying to you today, Tony, that I realized that this gene editing, this kind of CRISPR that we keep referring to, if we take away the in silico and the fact that they know absolutely every knock-on effect, well, if you're editing one gene, that in turn could actually activate or deactivate other dormant genes that lie within us. And that in itself could reprogram our neural pathways. Now, obviously, they would probably do that deliberately, but it just shows you again how totally independent of one another we've kind of been looking at the same stuff.
Yeah, and optogenetics genetics, let's break that down a little bit. Very simply, that is the transmission, the carrier of information, zeros and ones, by photons. And this is done at the speed of light throughout the human brain. And this is exactly what LiFi is trying to mimic, the light speed transmission of data. So it's no big deal. I mean, they just looked to what God created. They looked to, if you want, to nature, and they copy it. And optogenetics is really just the study of how light is transmitted through our DNA and how it carries that information through the DNA to our brains. The DNA is, as I have said, is the mainframe, whereas the brain is the quantum computer. It does the number crunching. The memories are not stored in the human brain. Although you read in the scientific papers, they'll tell you, oh, it's in the neurons, in the synaptic dendrite-driven connections. No, those are just transmission points. Those are just data connectors. The memories are not in the brain. They're in the DNA. That's why the information has to travel by photons from the DNA to the brain and back. And that's why we get into things like discussions of genetic memories, along with genetic traits. There are historical experiences that our ancestors acquired and became embedded in their DNA that are passed on generation after generation. Now, that has nothing to do with the afterlife and regression and all of that nonsense. What I'm talking about here is just the storage of information in the DNA. But when we look at the fact that they can insert genes for light-sensitive proteins into brains and turn them on and off, folks, again, it's mind control. They'll always tell you they're trying to, cure this and cure that. That's just to keep the funding flowing. It sounds conspiratorial. It sounds, hype. But if you look at the people that are in control and you understand their agendas, their written, published agendas, it is all about control. Go ahead, sir.
Our quantum entanglement is starting to really annoy me now, Tony, because I was about to make myself sound really intelligent there and ask you about whether genetic memory, whether that would be tied to all of this then. But, as per usual, I'm sitting here now left with nothing to say. I'm starting to wonder if we're actually in some kind of superposition, Tony. I'm wondering if we're actually one entity just expressing itself differently on other sides of the Atlantic. I really am.
Well, I think that maybe there's some shared DNA material in our history somewhere, and shared lineage, because I think there was a bifurcation of the DNA somewhere along the line, and some of my DNA is over here and yours is over there, but it came from the same source. The only way I can explain it.
If people are wondering why I'm laughing, honestly, it's beyond belief. It truly is, because I'm literally sitting here, right? Genetic memory, got it scribbled down, and Tony says it as I'm writing it. And this is the kind of thing that happens. I know we say it all the time, but it's bamboozling to me. It truly is. It's amazing. It's great.
Well, I think you are presenting a hint of what is going to come in December when Kathleen and I get into talking about quantum entanglement with Jesus Christ, because it has to do with augmentation and transformation that we sort of touched on in the previous conference that we did, that you were a part of, Kev, on September 16th and 17th. And that's available at anthonypatch.com. It's on demand. It's called Full Spectrum Dominance. But what I'm getting at is we've set the stage. We've set the foundation for what's coming in this next conference. And this is spooky action at a distance, as described by the late Albert Einstein. Quantum entanglement. That's why I named the magazine, titled the magazine Entanglement, because this is at the heart of everything that's going on in quantum mechanics and quantum communications and quantum brains, quantum computers. It is all about quantum entanglement. Now, I'm going to give you a personal example, and I hope Kathleen doesn't mind my saying this. Last night, we were talking on the phone, and I was trying to remember the name of an Irish female vocalist. And I kept saying, I've got to find it. I'm going to Google it. I'll find it. She goes, no. She goes, it's Enya. I said, wait a second. I couldn't even remember the name in my own mind. How did you know I was even thinking about Enya when I didn't even have it in my own conscious thought? She goes, I don't know. I just knew you were trying to find the name Enya. So, Kev, this is what's happening. And I think I'll put it out to the audience. Look within your own experiences. Look within your own day-to-day activities and begin to note some of these, because there are people that are being transformed, that are having their entanglement enhanced. I kid you not. Kev and I and Kathleen are just but one example.
Exactly.
Go ahead, sir.
Tony, because I was going to say, don't dare think that myself and Tony and Kathleen and Nano Girl as well, because she shares this with me. She gets more of my emotional kind of feelings and stuff like that. She's really, really, I don't know how she does it, but she'll message me when maybe feeling a bit down, or even if it's the other way, if I'm elated over something, Nano can pick up on it. But again, we are not special. We're just using our own personal experiences as an example to what I imagine you might not have noticed it yet, but start looking out for it, because you really are. I think more and more people are going to be experiencing this, feeling this kind of thing as the months and years go on. And Tony, we've not spoke at all off air about yours and Kathleen's upcoming kind of conference. So it's not as if we're kind of sharing details off air and then I'm just dropping little carrots here and there for you to pick up on so that it looks like this is all organic. This is literally all organic. It truly is. And like I say, Tony, other people out there, they're going to be experiencing it. I just, maybe they haven't realized it yet. Maybe they haven't contacted the person that they're sharing it with. They don't realize they're on that same frequency. It's hard to explain, but I'm sure more and more people are going to get this.
I guess a more familiar way to relate it is people might think of it as ESP, but it really is not ESP. It is literally just thinking the same thoughts as someone else at the same time. I don't really consider it as, remote viewing or reading somebody's mind or anything active like that. It's as if you're both thinking the same thoughts at the same time. And that's what quantum entanglement is. It's two particles, just to give a brief definition, two particles separated by any distance, but they are already connected. There's no time involved in this connection. It's a pre-existing connection. And one particle, a quantum particle, has an up spin, has a down spin. And if you affect the spin of one particle, let's say you take the down spin and change it to an up spin using energy to affect it, then that will likewise instantaneously, no time delay, change the spin of the other particle that it's entangled with. What we're getting at is the spin of particles, up or down, represents 0 or 1. This is the essence of quantum mechanics and quantum computing, the changing of the spin. When you change the spin of a particle, you either change it from being a 0 to a 1, or from a 1 to a 0, or simultaneously in the case of entangled particles, which is the essence of the definition as to the mechanics of D-Wave's quantum computers using qubits. Quantum entanglement is how they achieve superposition of zeros can be in ones at the same time as being a 1 being a 0. So what I'm getting at, folks, is there's a lot more happening to us at this quantum scale, changing the spin of our quantum particles in our brains. And we just have to be more aware of it, because once someone like Kevin, myself, bring it to your attention, it's kind of like saying, hey, look for a blue Volkswagen while you're out traveling around in your car today. All of a sudden, you start seeing blue Volkswagens everywhere because it's been brought to your attention. Same thing with this quantum entanglement phenomenon, in which somebody's going to say, you know what, I was just thinking the same thing. Well, that's because your information is tied to each other. Go ahead, sir.
Absolutely. And it's this tied to each other where I want to go now, because in the past, I've often heard about twins sharing thoughts, sharing feelings. And that's not a big leap to make when you think of these two embryos in the same cell. Highly easy for entanglement to happen there. And it just so happens we have a twin on the show tonight to talk about this. And you all know him as Johnny Whistles. That's right. The three amigos are back again. And Johnny, you, like I say, are a twin. And you've just come into the call here. You've not been able to listen to any of the show apart from what we're talking about with the entanglement. And you were sharing with us that this is what you get with your twin, right?
Yeah, it is, Kev. Unbelievably, we've had strange things happen. The thing about it, Jean, my sister, my twin sister, she is the one that notices the things. Do you know what I mean? Between the two of us, it's not me, it's her. Like, I was in a fight one day with a guy, and he had his arm in a plaster, and I told him to fight with one arm. So he did. He used the one with the plaster, and he whacked me right in the face, and I got a black eye. Now, my twin sister, who is miles from where I am, didn't know anything about it. And she comes in with my mother, same eye, absolutely black. One time when I was going to work, she gave me a call because the night before my ear took, it was this really big, I don't know what it was, some sort of boil in my ear. And what they done was that they had to actually cut it open and give me stitches to fix it. And in the morning, I'm standing at the bus stop waiting to go to work, and Jean called me. She says, "Is there anything wrong with your ear?" And I told her about last night, and then sure as hell, the woman who's standing next to me says, "You're pouring the blood. The stitches had opened." Do you know what I mean? When I was standing at the bus stop, so I had to go to the hospital to get it fixed. But Jean, she is the one that feels the thing between us. I've never ever felt it. I've never ever come away any imagination of Jean, but Jean is the one from us two who actually knows when something's wrong with me.
You know, this is why I feel kind of bad, Johnny, when Nano picks up on my feelings, because it's almost as if she's the receiver and I'm the transmitter, and I can never return the favour. I can never be there for her instantly when she might need somebody to talk to. So I think this is really fascinating. And Johnny, how rude of me. How are you doing, sir? It's great to have you back with us.
Oh, Kev, fantastic, honestly. It really is, honestly. And to have Mr. Patch with us as well, Kev. Wow, the three amigos, the three particles.
The three particles? I like that. The trifecta.
We're a tetrahedron.
Oh, don't you start with your tetrahedrons, Mr. Patch.
Well, we're going to after this break.
Yeah, we've got about 4 minutes left, Tony. Where would you like to round this one off before we come back for hour 2?
Well, I'd ask the audience to go into their favorite search engine and look up algebraic topology, okay? ALGEBRAIC. That's the closest I'll get to singing. Algebraic topology. Because we're going to be talking about mathematics, geometry, neurons, and the dimensions of the brain, and the 600-cell tetrahedron, and John Dee and Ed Kelly, and all the way back into history, because information from the other side results in mathematical equations prescribing geometric arrangement of quantum particles, known as alchemy. That's where we're going, buddy.
Algebraic topology. And as I was saying to Anthony before the show, Johnny, not the kind of subject you want to be trying to pronounce after a couple of malt whiskies.
No, definitely not. I don't think I would even try that one myself, Kev.
Absolutely. So, folks, we are just about on the break, and I'll take this opportunity to tell you all that tomorrow night we'll be joined by Ben Emlyn Jones. Oh, wow. He's going to be coming onto the show, Mr. Whistles, and he's wanting to get into the new mysterious void that they have found in the pyramid, and so much more. Now, hopefully, if Tony's not too busy and he hasn't got anything on, he'll be back with us on Wednesday night. And then on Thursday, to round off the week on KBS, I've got a firm favourite of all the listeners coming back. Mr. Bill Bean will be here. And trust me, you don't want to miss this one, folks, because Bill has been telling me about some of his latest, I can't call them adventures, I think we could call them episodes, and you don't want to miss this. And of course, on Friday, myself and Mr. Patch will be back on the Anthony Patch Show. So all to look forward to right here. And Johnny, before we do go to the break, you're on holiday just now, man. Are you enjoying being in holiday mode?
Oh, Kev. Kev, I'm sitting here with just my house coat, cup of coffee, a Colombian king size, and I'm happy as hell. Wow.
There's a picture I really didn't need in my mind, Johnny. I thought you were going to say that you were sitting in your birthday suit for one horrible.
No, it's too cold.
And what happened to you on Freaky Friday, John? Come on, tell the audience.
You won't believe it, but actually I fell asleep again.
Johnny whistles.
Yeah, I know.
Johnny, what is wrong with this quantum machine between your ears, man? It just keeps on almost losing power.
See, it's a stupid particle, Kev. You know, it just acts differently.
Oh, the whistles quark. That's what it is. Folks, we'll be back on the other side when Anthony Patch will get into algebraic topology of the brain, no less. Talk about the multiverse in our own minds. Find out more after the break. Don't go anywhere.
This is the Kev Baker Show.
Welcome back, everyone. Hour number 2 already on tonight's Kev Baker Show with me, your host, Kev Baker. I have got Johnny Whistles with us as well now. And of course, Monday night means only one thing. Anthony Patch is here as well. We're about to get into the geometry of the brain, or more precisely, the algebraic topography or topology or whatever it's called, Tony, because today I was looking into some of this, and I often talk about multidimensional reality and the multiverse and things like this. And here's articles talking about the fact that we've basically got a multiverse and a multidimensional brain sitting in our skulls. So talk to us about what you found, Tony.
Well, we're going to get into defining algebraic topology very briefly. Then we're going to step over into a project that's been going on since about 2005 in Switzerland, known as the Blue Brain Research Project. And therein is where we're going to start talking about dimensions of the brain itself. So the algebraic topology is a branch of mathematics that uses tools from abstract algebra to study topological spaces. I'll translate that for us. Basically, what they're doing is they're taking algebraic processes, okay? If you want to call them theorems, or you want to call them formulas or equations, they are describing geometric shapes. Now, the simplest shape, which is a polygon, is a tetrahedron that I go on and on and on about all the time. But this has direct application to the construct of our quantum computer between our ears, because neurons have been discovered to actually take on the shape of what they call pyramidal or tetrahedral configurations. Picture a neuron as a tetrahedron, or a more familiar description would be a triangle or a pyramid, because many people may not be familiar with the tetrahedron. The difference between the two, pyramid has a square base, tetrahedron has a triangular base. So the neurons in our brain are arranged as tetrahedrons, and then they're connected by dendrites. They have all of these filaments that connect one another. Now, Kev, I shared with you from the Blue Brain Research Project out of Switzerland a short video. So be prepared to refer to that in just a moment, because the point about halfway through the video that was astounding that I shared with you is where I'm going. So the Blue Brain Project is a Swiss national brain initiative. So think about Obama a few years back when he said, we're going to map the brain, the human brain. Okay, all of that research is coalesced, if you will, in Switzerland with the Blue Brain Project. They're actually bringing in from Europe, specifically Germany and the United Kingdom, and from the United States, their research into mapping the human brain and understanding the geometric shape of the brain, the configuration, the actual algebra of the brain that describes the arrangement of these tetrahedrally shaped neurons. We're literally talking about the shape of the brain at the quantum scale and then up to the atomic and molecular scale of the neuron. So this is a Swiss National Brain Initiative. A few years ago, this project was funded with $1 billion with a B, $1 billion. They're taking this very seriously. And what is the end point to this European Human Brain Project that provided $1 billion in funding? It is to build a blue gene supercomputer running Michael Heinz's neuron software. They're building something so far beyond just an artificial neural network, which we've covered as the recursive neural network of AI, the artificial neural network of simply mimicking the arrangement, the connections of the human brain. They're going beyond this to the quantum scale, to the arrangement of quantum particles that form the neurons and then become the tubulin dimers and the microtubules, the neuron, the dendrites, the synapses. They're actually building what we have talked about, Kev, for so long. They're talking about the blue gene supercomputer, building that computer of warm and wet qubits. That's where they're going beyond the artificial neural network. They're actually building a chemical supercomputer that is a quantum computer, and that's what this whole project is about. Now, does that blow your mind?
It really does, and this kind of sounds similar to what you've been kind of speculating as to what D-Wave have been doing with their later models, Tony, this almost biological quantum computer. Is this the same kind of thing that we're talking about here?
It is exactly the same thing. Again, just because they're bringing all the information together in Switzerland does not mean that it is not connected with what D-Wave is doing in terms of communicating with the other side, obtaining the information, and then spreading that information out to other laboratories. We made the connection between D-Wave and CERN in Geneva, Switzerland. So right next door is the Blue Brain Initiative, in which they're trying to create an artificial quantum brain comprised of warm and wet qubits.
Wow. Now, Tony, I'm going to have to hand over to you for 2 minutes here because I'm going to have to run and do something that we were talking about before the show. So I'll be right back, okay?
Absolutely. So, Johnny, you and I are going to kind of talk about this a little bit, but algebraic topology really is prescribing geometric arrangements of material, of matter. And when we get into talking about this in relation to the brain, they're talking about how do these neurons arrange themselves. If they are tetrahedrons, then what shape do these tetrahedrons organize themselves into? And unfortunately, you didn't have the opportunity to look at the video that I mentioned that I sent to Kev just before the show. But picture a tree. This is the best way to describe it. You have a tree with roots, and the tree is growing upward, and it has branches, and it branches out. That is exactly the model of the dendrites, the connecting fibers between neurons. Now, if you bundle these trees together, if you gather these trees that are vertically arranged, you gather them together into a bundle, and then you look at the top portion, the top of this bundle of dendrites, these tree branches, the shape that they naturally take on is a geometric shape. It is a six-sided shape. It is a hexagon. They naturally occur as a hexagon, which is an evolution. It is a replication, more specifically, of tetrahedrons. Tetrahedron is a very simple polygon. A more complex polygon made of tetrahedrons is the hexagon. This is what the Blue Brain Project just discovered, that the arrangement of dendrites, and therefore the neurons, which are tetrahedral shapes by themselves, each individual neuron, they actually form a hexagon. Now, what does this mean? Where am I going with this?
I mean, Tony, when you actually see this, it almost looks like a honeycomb effect, doesn't it?
Oh, you are so good. That's exactly what Kathleen said. She said, there's our tetrahedral quantum entanglement, buddy. It's not just two particles, it's three. Okay? She said the same thing. She said, that's what you see in a honeycomb, is the hexagon. Now, how many sides does a hexagon have? I already said it, but how many sides does it have?
6, my friend.
6, 6, 6. It, in biblical scripture, is the name of a man. Okay? Bible scripture tells you that the construct geometrically, the algebraic knowledge is 6. Therefore, 666 identifies the human by identifying the shape that the dendrites naturally gather into as a hexagon. Now, wait for it. You need a drum roll. I wish Johnny had his sound effects ready. You need a drum roll.
There you go. That's as good as I can.
All righty. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Have you ever heard of the hive mentality?
Oh, yes, indeed.
The hive brain. It is quite literal. We already have a hive brain. And as I say all the time, Satan does nothing but copy and counterfeit the geometry, the system, the construct of God. God created our brains in a hexagonal hive configuration. The algebraic formula describes that. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, sorry, Tony. I've actually posted a couple of pictures in the chat over at tfrlive.com/chat. I hope the listeners can see them. The first one was depicting that almost tree-like structure, Tony, that you see at the start of the video you sent me. And now I've sent them the one that is basically the honeycomb structure.
Very good. Very good. So we talk about the hive brain, that the agenda is to pull everybody into the hive brain and be, one with the computer, to upload your memories, your consciousness. Where we're going with the blue brain is that they believe that they have now identified the source of consciousness in the human brain. Kev, you want to take it from there?
Well, I really doubt whether they have actually found the key to consciousness, Tony. Wouldn't you? Or do you think this really is where it lies?
I think they're a little short. No, they have not identified the source of consciousness. And in my way of thinking, my way of looking at things through the glasses of the Holy Spirit, God will not allow them to cross that line, cross that threshold to actually determining the source and the definition of human consciousness. But here's where the Blue Brain Project has gone to. This is their level of advancement. They now are saying that these arrangements of tetrahedrons, the neurons, the algebraic topology, okay, the let's call it the mapping of the shape of the human brain. That's what topology is. It's the actual landscape of the brain described mathematically. What they have discovered in this algebraic process is that there are 11 dimensions in the human brain, 11 quantum scale dimensions of the quantum computing brain. Go ahead.
Well, I've got an article here as well, just backing up what Tony's saying here, and it says that it comes from the Daily Galaxy, and it says the human brain discovered to operate in 11 dimensions. Now, the picture that I sent you, the second picture there in the chat room, it shows you almost like the tree-like structure on the left-hand side, and then on the right-hand side, there's a big dark space, and then there's little geometric shapes all round about it, and it looks very much like one of these fractal arts that you would see, but that dark area, it's something that they can't image because this is in 11 dimensions. And to read a little part of this, it says, quote, "We found a world that we had never imagined," said Henry Macram, director of the Brain Project, the Blue Brain Project, sorry. Quote, "There are tens of millions of these objects, even in a small speck of brain, up through 7 dimensions. In some networks, we even found structures with up to 11 dimensions." There's Swiss scientists studying the brain using an advanced mathematical system, like Tony's been describing here, algebraic topology, discovered that it operates on up to 11 different dimensions, creating multiverse-like structures within our own brains. The researchers were able to uncover architectural structures that appear when the brain has to process information before they disintegrate into nothing. The findings suggest that when we examine brain activity with low-dimensional representations, we only get a shadow of the actual real activity taking place. This means we can see some information, but not the full picture. Quote, "So in a sense, our discoveries may explain why it has been so hard to understand the relation between brain structure and function." It goes on to say their findings published in the Journal of Frontiers of Computational Neuroscience reveals the hugely complicated processes involved in the creation of neural structures, potentially helping explain why the brain is so difficult to understand and tying together its structures with its function. The researchers focused on a neural network structures within the brain using for the first time, here it is, algebraic topology, a system used to describe networks with constantly changing spaces and structures. And again, quoting the scientist, it says, "Algebraic topology is like a telescope and microscope at the same time. It can zoom into networks to find hidden structures, the trees in the forest, if you like, and see the empty spaces, the clearings, all at the same time." And the EPFL team discovered that when they presented the virtual tissue with stimulus, groups of neurons form a clique with up to 11 different dimensions. Each neuron connects to every other neuron in a very specific way to produce a precise geometric object. The more neurons in a clique, the higher the dimensions. The structures assembled formed enclosures for high-dimensional holes that the team have dubbed cavities. Once the brain has processed the information, the clique and the cavity disappears. You still there?
You know, it's amazing, isn't it? You and I have been talking about here. Are you there?
I'm here. Are you there?
We have to reconnect.
No problems. I'll reconnect you, Tony. I think Tony's got a bit of lag there, but
yeah
I mean, this is the kind of stuff that Tony's been talking to us about for a while now, Johnny, and it does get very deep in amongst the weeds, and it can be hard to understand, but hopefully as we progress through the shows and we keep covering it, it will become clearer. And the fact that our own brains, John, actually work in a multi-dimensional manner That in itself is literally mind-blowing, is it not?
Oh, definitely is. And the thing about the brain, Kev, I've got a doctor who I visit who she really is big on the brain, Kev. That's all she talks about. And she said it, she mentioned the brain one day, and I says, oh, you mean the quantum computer that can run at this temperature? I says, they can try and come up with an idea of what they think is a brain. I says, but they'll never be able to do what we can do. And she went into this story about just how many things. She said, just like if you're going to eat something, she says, your brain sends 6 signals to your stomach before you've even had the thought that you're going to have something to eat, and prepares itself to take food. She says it's the most unbelievable thing in the world. She says, yeah.
Because
they're looking for ways to, do you know what I mean, emulate this, Kev. It baffles me that they can actually do it.
And Tony, you're back with us now, sir.
You know, every time we get into sensitive topics that they don't like us talking about, that happens. And
well, you see,
it's been a while.
Yeah, because this hasn't happened for a while. I was just going to say that. I mean, the listeners don't appreciate that when we're, I won't say preparing for the show, because it's just two guys chatting usually before the show, no preparation hardly, but we always get cut off at the same time, don't we? But we can handle that, because then when we do the show, we usually, touch wood, 9 times out of 10 get left alone. But obviously, Tony, you're touching on something that they're not too happy about here.
Yeah, they're not happy when we get into these things this deep. And talking about deep, I'm going to read off for the audience, if you want to get pen and paper ready. This is an article. Actually, it's a peer-reviewed paper that comes out of CERN that I've cited a number of times, and I sent to you today, Kev. I think it's important that people get an example of one of the source articles related to the tetrahedrons, because I'm going to take us all the way back to my 600-cell tetrahedron here in just a second. But I want you to appreciate the source of this information that you and I are talking about, Kev, because it's not just the Blue Brain Project out of Switzerland. It is also CERN itself. So here we go. This is the title of this peer-reviewed paper is World Line String Bomb, that's BOHM, Bomb Quantum Potential, E8, and Consciousness. I'm going to give you the author of the paper and the number of the article. Frank Todd, interestingly, he's known as Tony. Frank Dodd, that's D-O-D-D, Tony Smith Jr. 2015 paper. VIXRA 1512.0300. Now, the reason I'm citing that is because this is a seminal work. This proves the 600-cell tetrahedron as the model of the universe without them actually stating that it's the model of the universe. Now, we can set that aside for a second, because what they're talking about are multi-dimensions. The Blue Brain Project we have cited says that there are between 1 and 7 dimensions, perhaps as many as 11 that they've identified. And Kev has shared the photographic evidence of the tetrahedrons that produce as cavities, as black spots in the photographic evidence, the cavities representing these dimensions, as many as perhaps 11. I'm going to read this abstract very quickly for you. Penrose Hameroff type quantum consciousness is described. Are you there, Kev?
Yeah, I'm here, Tony. I'm here.
Okay, I keep getting the Skype bounce here. Okay.
Just you keep going. You sound fine.
Okay, quantum consciousness is described in terms of E8 physics and 26-dimension, 26D, 26-dimension string theory, with strings seen as world lines and bomb quantum potential and Sarfati thought decoherence, tubulin dimer information, content of microtubules is seen to correspond to the Clifford 16 algebraic, okay, that's algebraic topology, folks. Clifford algebra, in which E8 Lie algebra is naturally contained. What they're saying is that naturally occurring tetrahedrons algebraically form 26 dimensions, not just 7, not just 11. Criterion annihilation operators and algebraic quantum field theory and AQFT quantum code for Baum quantum theory are also described. What this whole paper is saying is that there are 26 dimensions of string theory that prescribe the universe. Where the Blue Brain Project is falling short is they don't realize that they're only halfway there. They're not even halfway there. They will eventually discover in the human brain that the human brain is constructed as a 600-cell tetrahedron comprised of 26 dimensions of tetrahedrons. Because as above, so below. The universe is a 600-cell. The human brain likewise is a 600-cell. They have to be the same because that is the basic algebraic topology of everything, is tetrahedrons. Go ahead, sir.
These tetrahedrons are everywhere. We're reading about pyramidal cells in the brain today as well. And Tony, you sent me a kind of hint at where to go and look at something that is very, very striking indeed. And I'm going to post it in the chat room because we've often looked at your 600-cell model of the universe and an amazing structure it is indeed. So imagine how surprised I was today when you told me to go and Google the Amazon HQ in Seattle. Because sitting outside there are 3 very interesting dome or glass structures indeed. Now, they're not precisely your 600 cell, but they are absolutely full of tetrahedrons.
Yes, they are. They are 3 geodesic domes that are merged together. A geodesic dome is comprised of tetrahedrons. What they have done, and this is the design of this headquarters for Amazon, we'll talk about after the break.
I left a wee cliffhanger there, folks. We'll be back on the other side. Myself, Johnny Whistles, and Anthony Patch. Don't go anywhere. We'll explain to you why this is relevant to all of us, because if they can understand the mind at this level and recreate it, they can also control it. Stay tuned. Don't go anywhere.
This is the Kev Baker Show.
There we go, folks. And just like that, the Kev Baker Show was back. I hope you're enjoying all of this tonight. I am having an absolute blast. Got Anthony Patch with me and Johnny Whistles as well. The 3 amigos are back tonight. We've been getting in depth into the brain. And I appreciate that a lot of this information is very, very deep indeed. And a lot of the audience that tune in to the shows with Anthony Patch, they really appreciate that. But there may be some of you out there that are thinking, well, how is this relevant to absolutely anything in the world? Well, it's very, very relevant indeed. And if all you take away from it is the fact that they have modeled the brain down to the point where they can literally rebuild it on a computer, think about the actual potential to then control our brains, something that we've been talking about for absolutely forever, basically, since we've been doing these shows. It really is, and it all comes down to that. It's all down to control. And tonight, Tony's been getting into something called algebraic topology. We were getting into those tubulin dimers and all that good stuff as well, Tony. And just before the break, we were kind of touching on the Google HQ with their 600-cell model of the universe. And you were about to kind of give us a punchline before we went to break.
Well, I think the punchline here is that these projects like Blue Brain, as well as the projects that are going on in the United States in the mapping of the human brain, the neurological pathways, is that they are moving towards my model of the universe, therefore my model of the human brain. Now, I call it my model only so that it is distinctive from the model of the universe that mainstream science wants to put out, which is still the Big Bang Theory based on gravity. Okay, so without going down that rabbit hole, I'm just simply trying to set a departure aside for people to understand that there is an actual, if you want to call it a matrix, there's a geometric arrangement at the quantum scale and at the cosmic scale, a geometric arrangement that is represented in man's definition of algebra. And that takes you into calculus and into trigonometry in the final description. But the point here is information. In science, they will tell you that information cannot be destroyed. And they're correct. So let's do what we always do. Let's define information. Well, it's pretty simple, really. In our human brain representation and understanding of the mechanisms of the universe, information is simply binary. It's 0 and 1. Now, it may also be ternary, which is 3 numbers. That's -1, 0, and +1. But I don't want to get too deep in the weeds on that. The point here is information is mathematical. Yes, we have our alphabets, we have our spoken language, our written language, but that is also comprised of mathematics. The actual words that are spoken, the actual words that are written on paper, if you want to talk Mandela effect, this has some relevance to this. It is actually the geometric arrangement of quantum particles that prescribe zeros and ones, that prescribe information. So everything in the universe is represented mathematically through mathematical information. Now, before I get too deep into something else here, Kev, I want to give you an opportunity to jump in.
Yeah, well, let me ask you then, Tony, because I was reading an article recently that said that the top mathematicians in the world had basically come up with, in their words, almost reached a formula to describe consciousness. Now, I appreciate that everything in the universe boils down to math. I call it the divine code. Now, surely, though, consciousness cannot be defined by a mathematical formula, right? And I'm suspecting the only reason they're putting this out there is so that one day in the very near future, one of their robots or one of their AI systems will obviously pass this formulaic description of consciousness, and that will allow them to say, well, look, this is now a conscious entity. Give it rights and everything else that goes with it. But maybe you can boil it down to just a mathematical formula. What's your take on that?
Well, you can arrange mathematically the qubits, whether they're comprised of niobium and gold, as with the early models of D-Waves quantum computers, or warm and wet qubits that are chemically based. That's phosphorus and calcium and oxygen for warm and wet qubits. You can arrange the qubits using the algebraic topological arrangement. The geometry can be arranged, but that doesn't equate to actual consciousness because, as we always say, Kev, you cannot separate the physical from the spiritual. It is the spiritual aspect of consciousness that they cannot reproduce. That comes from the Creator. That comes from God. So they can go ahead and they can create physically a quantum computer that by all rights, to sort of use your pun there, talking about rights, by all rights should be sentient, should achieve consciousness, should be self-aware and have a conscious aspect to it. But when in fact, even when they get to the 26th dimension, if they ever do, and they actually realize the 600-cell tetrahedron as a brain, a human brain, I contend they already have with the D-Wave computers at the 16th model. Beginning even with the 10th model, they achieve the 600 cell configuration. But that does not mean that it is conscious. Is it sentient? Is it self-aware? Yes, I believe the 16th model of D-Wave is, with their warm and wet qubits. Does it have consciousness as we define it as a human? No. It can be self-aware in an artificially intelligent definition of intelligence, but it is not conscious, and it will not achieve consciousness. Even when they arrange their warm and wet qubits in a 600 cell 26-dimensional configuration. Go ahead.
26 dimensions. I barely struggle to grasp what 11 dimensions, this geometric shapes they talk about, Tony. But, you know, this is where I believe 5G really comes into the equation, because, correct me if I'm wrong, but if they're able to affect any of the spins of the neurons involved in creating those geometric shapes that result in thoughts and things like that, then this is where they're really going to be able to manipulate us at that quantum level, right? Because that's going to change the entire structure of what our brain is naturally trying to come up with.
Yeah, because if you're able to turn off and on proteins, specific proteins in the brain, you are controlling the machinery of the brain. By controlling the chemicals of the brain, you then get into the actual transmission of information. I've often said that our brains are nothing more than chemical computers. And we know from psychiatry, we know from pharmacological applications with the human brain, that the brain does, it is modified, it is affected by chemicals. And we know that that occurs naturally. If you look at dopamine, if you look at the naturally occurring endorphins in the human brain, naturally it is a chemical computer. So first you have to be able to arrange them mathematically, geometrically, and then you have to provide the proper chemical soup, if you will, the recipe for it to function in a warm and wet environment of superconductivity and supersymmetry and superposition, which is all part of quantum mechanics. So what we're getting at here, Kevin, I want to jump in here real quick so we don't lose time, is what they call morphometrics, okay? Traditional morphometrics, the TMD. We're getting into topological morphology descriptor. Now, that is a TMD abbreviation. It provides for a method of encoding spatial structure of any tree of, when they talk about trees, as I said earlier, the trees of the dendrites from each of the neurons. So all of these branches that come off from the neurons are dendrites. The arrangement of that, the description of that, the topological shaping, morphology of the descriptor, how you're describing the arrangement of those dendrites coming off the neurons, is done. And again, Johnny, we need a drum roll here. It provides, there you go, provides a method for encoding the spatial structure of any tree. And the drum roll was for as a barcode. The way that they use the TMD to describe the arrangement of the dendrites coming off the neurons, it is described, it is represented in a barcode configuration. So jump off from that and then I'll read some more.
A barcode. And if people want to picture these dendrites coming off from the neuron, the best way I can describe it is to think of the roots of a plant or a tree under the ground, because that's basically what it looks like, Tony. It's just like the individual roots coming off this one neuron, isn't it?
It is. And just to refresh, we look at a gathering of those trees, and the top-down perspective on the gathering of the trees results in that hexagon. So we're all the way back into, the geometry of it. So The use of this mathematically rigorous method, which they're calling the TMD, the topological morphology descriptor, the use of the mathematically rigorous method will advance our understanding of the anatomy and diversity of branching morphologies. That's a mouthful. What they're saying here, folks, is that they are mapping the human brain geometrically, and they're representing these complex arrangements of these neuronal trees. I didn't say moronal, I said neuronal trees as barcodes. Now, we've talked about Mark of the Beast and, barcode and all that stuff. I'm just throwing it out there. You come to your own conclusion. I want to read something that's a little bit deep, but again, we always want to define. We want to go to the actual source. So I'm going to read this very quickly. The topological barcodes of the two types of dendrites encode the starting and ending radial difference of the tree's branches from the soma and can be summarized in the density profiles also presented. What that means is that the gathering of these dendrites, they put them together and rank them in a barcode so that it is easy to interpret the shape. The barcode is a simplified stochastic arrangement of these neuronal trees, these dendrite trees. These gatherings are so complex that they have to simplify it in a barcode arrangement. I just find it interesting that they decided to use a barcode. It has so many other ramifications to that. So what we're getting here, we're getting to a point here, and it comes back to the shape. They describe the dendrites as a layer 5 cortical pyramidal cell. So in the cortex of the brain, these dendrites are represented as pyramidal cells. Now, if you look at them closely, and they're not classically pyramidal, they say pyramidal, as I said at the beginning of the show, Kev, because more people are familiar with the shape of a pyramid. If you say tetrahedron, unless they listen to our shows, Kev, they don't know what a tetrahedron is. They are actually tetrahedrons with a triangular base. They are not pyramids, and you can see that in the photographic evidence itself. Go ahead.
And yet, when you look into this, they'll call them pyramidal cells, but like Tony's defined there, they are actually tetrahedrons, the things that we talk about all the time. And Tony, I think Johnny's wanting to throw in something at you here, and it's to do with the geometry as well, isn't it, John? Because you're kind of basically talking about polygons, aren't you?
Yeah, that's right, Kev. Because I use a lot of 3D programs, and when you want to make something, then you have to turn it into polygons before you make it. And it's just weird that every time I think about, these massive amount of, triangles, Kev, that are in these formations, it just amazes me. It's just polygons, really. Do you know what I mean? I just wondered if is there really any correlation between you have to turn it into polygons and your brain, or is that the way your brain represents things?
Yes, they have to be polygons. And this is really deep, and I'll get into this in the presentation, the live stream presentation in mid-December that Kathleen and I are going to be putting on. We are going to get into how information is arranged as a tetrahedron. We're talking about the sides of the tetrahedrons. Now, you're talking polygons. Polygons are tetrahedrons. A tetrahedron, by definition, is the simplest polygon. And that just means that it has multiple sides. Okay? Polygon is multiple sides. The simplest polygon in the natural world, if you will, is a tetrahedron. Therefore, when you are arranging information, it is arranged by placing specific information. Let's say it's just a 0 or a 1. That represents one side of the tetrahedron. Okay, one straight line on that tetrahedral shape is one piece of information, a 0 or a 1. More specifically, and we'll explain this in the conference, it is ternary. We need to get out of this idea that everything is binary. That's simply the way the computers operate. The way our brain operates is using 3 numbers, -1, 0, which is a balance, and +1, ternary. You have, therefore, on the sides of the polygon, the tetrahedron, one side is a 0, another straight line side is a -1, and yet the third one is a +1. So it is a ternary representation of information resulting in a polygon configuration, which then provides your graphics that you see with your graphical processing units, the GPUs that are on your board in your computer, on your graphics board, that you are then seeing in your monitor when you're playing those games. They're all polygons because the information has to be arranged in a tetrahedral pattern. There you go.
There you go, Johnny.
Amazing. It really is.
I mean, so that makes us 3 a polygon of truth, Tony.
It does, and I'm going to stand with that because the most rigid form is a tetrahedron, a polygon. It's the most stable.
It's the easiest geometric shape to get to. I mean, people can picture this easily. You could have a line. Well, that's not a geometric shape. It's just a line between 2 points. You could have 2 lines, but then you'd really have a right angle, or you could spin the other line about. But you don't have that shape, that actual solid shape, until you get 3 parts to it. And that's when you can start constructing. It's the easiest form to make, Tony.
Yeah, it is the simplest form. And again, just for folks that haven't heard me say this, I tip my hat to Buckminster Fuller. C60 carbons, Buckminster fullerenes, microtubules, tubulin dimers, the buckyballs. You find C60 carbon arranged as buckyballs. They look like soccer balls, naturally occurring in all of our elements. Also, at the cosmological scale, you find buckyballs in all of the galaxies. This has all been proven. So as above, so below. This is why I keep harping on this, is because I read this just after I published my first book, Covert Catastrophe. I read the biography of Buckminster Fuller, who I think he's on the level of Tesla as far as I'm concerned. Let me just, in a short way, define it that way. He said in his biography, the simplest polygon, the simplest form in nature is the tetrahedron. Now, what he did not say, and I this is the leap that I made with this, is he was actually describing, the singularity of the universe, the starting point. And he did not say that he was going counter to the Big Bang. I made the leap and said, okay, if the starting point of the universe, the singularity, the combination of all known energy that then results in matter, because it started with energy. It didn't start with a single particle. Sorry, CERN. Sorry, LHC. You're not going to find the particle. There is no singular particle. There's only energy. But when you have energy that slows down in its frequency and wavelength to form matter at its resonant frequency, that matter naturally arranges itself in the simplest form in nature, a single polygon, a tetrahedron. From that point, it replicates. There's no explosion. There's no Big Bang. It is a replication. In mathematics, there is a process called multiplication through division. This is what cells do in our body. They divide so that they will multiply. This is what tetrahedrons have been doing that make up everything at the quantum scale and the cosmological. They divide so as to multiply. That's how the universe expands, and that's what we're at today as we observe the cosmos are C60 carbon, Buckminster fullerene tetrahedrons at the cosmological scale. Thank you very much.
You've done it again. So I was going to sound intelligent again and ask you, well, is this why we still get told that the universe is expanding? It's not so much expanding, it's still replicating, right?
It sure is. And, you know, our good friend Robbie Spencer from SC Studios, who publishes Entangled Magazine for us, he's also building a new website. Yes, folks, we're having another iteration of the website. We are building one that is going to have a landing page that is going to blow your mind, because what we are putting together is the replication process that I just described. We're going to have that as our landing page.
You know, we often see the Illuminati, for lack of a better term, Tony, using their pyramid or that triangle logo, that kind of symbol. You know, there are many ways of trying to interpret it, but I wonder if this is them hiding in plain sight exactly the kind of stuff that you're talking about, because I imagine that at the very highest levels, they know what you're talking about. And that's why it wouldn't surprise me if that's why they picked a damn pyramid for their logo.
Well, it is exactly correct. And you know why they picked the pyramid? Is because they wanted to mislead people. It is all about obfuscation of the secret information, of the mystery societies want to keep the information to themselves, and they do that by misleading people. They mislead people by having a square-based pyramid. They would not build a pyramid as a tetrahedron, because that would give the secret away of the universe. And I just gave you the secret of the universe because that's what Buckminster Fuller defined and described for us. Now, I cited that paper from CERN talking about the 600-cell tetrahedron. Even that paper, in all of its complex mathematics of describing the 26 dimensions that are contained within the 600-cell tetrahedron, even they would not come out in that paper and say, that's the correct model of the universe. Even though they just described it, they would not label it as the true model of the universe. They obfuscate it with the pyramid structure. The pyramid results in a cube. The true shape of the universe is a sphere, but they don't.
Wow.
Oh, wow. You couldn't make that up. You could not make that up, folks. I would love to sit here and tell you I cut Tony off just for dramatic effect, but I don't. I really don't. And it doesn't happen all the time. But when he's laying out the true structure of the universe and telling you why they're trying to obfuscate that from us, isn't it interesting, Johnny, how this is when we get, shall we call it an interruption?
Yeah, Kev, definitely. It's an interruption. I mean, but the thing is, Kev, we've never ever had this problem with any other guest than Tony. Honestly, it just defies belief, mate. It really does.
Tony, there you are, giving everyone the cold, hard truth, and they just whacked you, or something whacked you. We won't give the alphabet agencies all the credit. I'm sure there's other things that work here.
And as God is my witness, I didn't touch anything.
You don't know this because you weren't on the call, right? But I was telling the listeners, I would love to tell them that I was cutting you off for dramatic effect, but I don't have to because I know it's going to happen when you start on this road anyway.
Every time. Anyway, all glory to God. All this information I just gave everybody, even the Buckminster Fuller stuff, all comes from God. You know what Buckminster Fuller said in his last broadcast interview? He was asked a series of questions, and every question he answered with, it's all about love.
Love is the answer, folks. It really is. Until tomorrow night with Ben Emlyn Jones. And thank you so much for tonight, Tony, Johnny, wherever you are, folks. Make it, keep it, and share it everywhere. TFR.
And didn't touch that dial.
God bless you all.
Let me go to my main man, author, researcher, public speaker, and fellow host on this brilliant network, Mr. Anthony Patch. Like I was saying, you can find all of his books, all of his work over at anthonypatch.com. And Tony, here we are again. Another week is gone. we always have a kind of laugh and a joke when we hook up on the Monday about the fact that the weekends seem to fly by quicker and quicker all the time, right?
It seems like I just talked to you saying, how was your weekend? It's pretty strange, but you know what? You speak the truth on Truth Frequency Radio, my friend, and that is no lie. Pardon the pun, because we're going to talk about LiFi tonight. LiFi. So, Kev, if you want to reference the article that we've been looking at, researchers just unveiled a new LiFi system that's 100 times faster than Wi-Fi. And we spent a lot of time talking about 5G. Tonight, we're going to talk about visible light communications systems, VLC, and a whole lot of other things. But that's going to kick us off with the Internet of Light.
And this was an article that you sent me from the metro.co.uk, and the headline here reads, Super Fast LiFi, and that's L-I-F-I, not Wi-Fi, but LiFi. 100 times faster than Wi-Fi, could be here sooner than we thought. And just to read through the first part of this, it says our phones and laptops could be about to get a lot faster, as a new breakthrough has brought super fast Li-Fi closer to reality. Now, Li-Fi stands for light fidelity, and it uses visible light from LED bulbs to transfer data rather than Wi-Fi radio waves, and could be 100 times faster than the traditional Wi-Fi that most of us are using just now. Chinese scientists now believe that devices could be available in just 6 years after a breakthrough using a carbon nanomaterial, full-color emissive carbon dots, to provide the light to transmit data. And it goes on to say that Q Songnan, an associate researcher,
This is the Kev Baker Show.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, ladies and gents. Welcome back for another week with me, your host, Kev Baker. That's right, it's time for the Kev Baker Show right here on your number one network, Truth Frequency Radio, www.tfrlive.com. Another week down and another week all planned and ready to go. And it's going to be another brilliant week of radio right here on KBS. For example, tonight, joined by my good friend, my colleague, we should really call you, since we work so closely together these days. Anthony Patch is here tonight, so we'll be joined by Anthony in just a moment. Now, remember to check out Anthony's website over at anthonypatch.com. And don't forget, you can check out my website over at kevbakershow.com as well. The new Entangled magazine is out, available through Anthony's website. There's also a link to that over there on kevbakershow.com. And I've also included a donate button on my website. And I want to thank the few people who have taken advantage of that so far. You know, it's through all of you out there that I'm still here in the first place, because of all the generosity that you showed me after my heart attack back in March. And I can't believe it's been over 6 months already since that happened. But I'm still not working, so I'm not going cap in hand, folks. But if you do think that what we do here is worth just a couple of dollars, then please, please, please feel free to visit the website and click on that. Or alternatively, you can subscribe to my show through my archive page, or you can subscribe to Anthony's show through his archive page, because right here at TFR, we are unique, because the network does not keep all of the money. They make sure us hosts get 50% of that as well. And that enables us to keep going with all the best of equipment and to keep ourselves going off air as well. So with that shameless plug out the way, at Chang Chun Institute of Optics said, quote, many researchers around the world are still working on this. We were the first to successfully create it using cost-effective raw materials such as urea with simple processing. Chinese tests in 2015 showed that Wi-Fi can reach speeds of 50 gigabits per second. The technology began to make waves after scientist Harold Haas of the University of Edinburgh, no less, right here in Scotland, discussed it at a 2011 TED Talk. It has been viewed 2.2 million times. Technologies based on Li-Fi are currently being developed by several companies in Russia, Mexico, and around the world. And to wrap it up, it says Dr. Haas has shown some cheap solar cells can be used as, quote, receiver for Li-Fi, and hopes that they could be used as a combined power source stroke data network in developing countries. And Dr. Haas says it should be so cheap that it's everywhere. The visible light spectrum comes for free. And Tony, this is mad how we've got into this, because it wasn't that long ago that we were talking about these new fantouche LED light bulbs that we're all being forced onto over here in the EU. And to pardon the pun, this definitely puts a different light on that.
It does, my friend. And we're going to toss a couple of numbers around here just to give some perspective and context to what we're talking about in terms of speed comparisons to Wi-Fi. But yeah, last Monday, we talked about the fact that the standard LED bulb in your home has been instituted by governments because they wanted to outlaw supposedly the energy wasting incandescent bulb. It has a tungsten filament in it. Well, it's all been a sham. The whole reason for the LED is because LEDs, for years, since 2005, have been available as a Wi-Fi receiver and transmitter, therefore a relay system for 4G and 5G millimeter wave broadcasting. Now, and you can go to your favorite, hardware supply chain, big box store, whatever, you can buy, and this has been out there for almost 2 years, you can buy Li-Fi equipped LED light bulbs. So this isn't brand new technology, folks. It's just interesting that Li-Fi hasn't really hit the radar for most people. Everybody, including myself, have been so focused on 5G Wi-Fi. But just to put it in perspective, a Li-Fi system will transmit, or relay is the way I prefer to look at these bulbs. And there are other systems other than just bulbs. You mentioned the carbon dots, and we'll get into the carbon aspect of this in a little bit. But 40 gigabytes per ray of light in a Li-Fi system is the data capacity. And now you compare 40 gigabytes to the average Wi-Fi system of 300 megabytes. Now, if you go to 5G, you can get up as much as 1 gigabyte in a 5G system. 4G, 3G, you're going to get 300 to 350 megabytes. We're talking 40 gigabytes in a Li-Fi system. We're going to talk about, the pros and cons of this in terms of the technology side of this. But picture this, folks. They're making a big deal about rolling out Wi-Fi everywhere. But Li-Fi, the light transmission, is exactly how our DNA operates with photons and how information passes through our quantum computer brains, all through photons at the speed of light. And this Li-Fi system is trying to mimic that. And we're going to get into the carbon-based mimicry of that in just a minute. Go ahead, sir.
Now, just over here in Britain alone, Tony, I noticed one of our hardware stores, and I'm not going to name them, I don't want to be taken to court or anything like that, but they've been selling technology for this for a short while now. And one of the things that people have been reporting with this new kind of LED lighting that I've picked up on anyway, is the fact that some people seem to say that it can cause sore heads, it can give you almost tired, sore eyes, stuff like this. So I'm wondering, is there any real health dangers that come from this Li-Fi technology? Because We all know that sitting near our routers with a Wi-Fi there can be pretty harmful over time. It's a cumulative effect. But what about this LiFi? I mean, can the light from that harm you at all, Tony?
Well, first of all, the light is not visible. What they're transmitting are rapid pulses of light that are pulsing so quickly that the human eye cannot detect these pulses. Now, is it going to be harmful to us? From what I've read so far, and again, I try to go to the scientific papers. I don't go to the typical trade magazines in the scientific commercial world. And as far as I can tell, there's really no danger to the LiFi in terms of affecting our minds like 5G does. 5G is a millimeter wave spectrum that is so close to a microwave oven. Therein lies, I think, the risk and the danger in terms of heating up your mind, literally heating up your brain in a microwave level spectrum of transmitting energy. But the light energy I see is relatively inert. Let's call it more natural, if you will. So I'm not that concerned about the LiFi. And it's easily interrupted. It has a short range. And therefore, we're going to get into talking about the different router systems and different router materials and locations, because it really is fairly fragile, but it has an incredible throughput, as I just said.
Now, I was looking into this today as well, and I was looking at some of the pros and cons about it, and I like some of the advantages that this offers. And just to read this here, it says efficiency. LiFi works on visible light technology. Since homes and offices already have LED bulbs for lighting purposes, the same source of light can be used to transmit data. Hence, it's very efficient in terms of cost as well as energy. Light must be on to transmit data, so when there is no need for light, it can be reduced to a point